Hey there, movie lovers. Welcome back to Fade to Fact. Today, we're rewinding to 1981, when military life got a comedic makeover thanks to a ragtag group of misfits, led by none other than Bill Murray. That's right, we're diving into Stripes, the rebellious army comedy that marched way out of line and into cult classic status. Directed by Ivan Reitman, Stripes blended military discipline with absurdist humor at just the right moment. Coming after Animal House and just before Ghostbusters, it helped launch a new wave of American comedy driven by improvisation, irreverence, and an anti-authority edge. It wasn't just a comedy, it was a moment in movie history where SNL-style chaos became mainstream. But what you might not know is how wild things got behind the scenes. The movie we ended up with was just the tip of the iceberg. From actors improvising entire scenes, to unexpected casting changes, to real military involvement and resistance, the journey to get Stripes made was just as chaotic as the story it told. So grab your dog tags, straighten up your uniform, and let's jump into 20 things you probably never knew about Stripes. 1. The script was originally written for Cheech and Chong. Stripes began life as a stoner comedy. The scriptwriters originally imagined it starring Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong as two burnout hippies who mistakenly joined the army. Their brand of counterculture humor was supposed to clash with military order, creating a totally different tone than what we got. But negotiations fell through mostly over creative control, and the duo walked away. That's when the script was retooled for Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, shifting the film's direction toward something more grounded in sarcastic wit than slapstick drug humor. Looking back, the Cheech and Chong version would have been a completely different movie, probably more surreal and way less structured. 2. Bill Murray agreed to do it, for a price. At the time, Murray wasn't eager to commit to another broad comedy. He was starting to crave more dramatic work. So when director Ivan Reitman approached him, Murray made a deal. He'd star in Stripes only if Reitman promised to help finance his future project, a serious adaptation of The Razor's Edge. Reitman agreed, even though it was a major gamble. Ironically, while Stripes became a box office smash, The Razor's Edge flopped. But the deal shows how even then, Murray was trying to steer his career into deeper waters even as audiences kept wanting more of his wisecracking charm. 3. Harold Ramis had never acted in a film before. Though known as a writer for Animal House and a creative force behind SCTV, Harold Ramis had never appeared in a feature film before Stripes. Originally, the role of Russell Ziske was meant for another actor, but when that fell through, Ramis stepped in. He was nervous at first, especially acting opposite Murray, whose improvisational style was famously unpredictable. But the chemistry between them, honed over years of working together, came through on camera. Ramis's dry, cerebral delivery balanced Murray's loose energy perfectly, creating a duo that would reunite in Ghostbusters just a few years later. 4. Judge Reinhold's pocket scene was completely improvised. One of the most quoted lines from the film, "Do I get to keep my pockets?" wasn't in the script. Judge Reinhold, playing the quirky recruit Elmo, made it up on the spot during his character's induction scene. Director Ivan Reitman let the camera roll and loved the awkward, offbeat delivery. Reinhold later said he was just trying to fill the silence and wasn't sure if it even made sense. But the line stuck, becoming a fan favorite. It's a perfect example of how Stripes leaned into its actors' instincts, often capturing gold by accident. 5. John Candy was a last-minute addition. Though it's hard to imagine Stripes without him, John Candy wasn't originally attached to the film. The role of Dewey Oxburger was considered for other SNL alumni like John Belushi or even Dan Aykroyd. But Candy, fresh from his SCTV success, charmed producers with his mix of goofiness and heart. He even did many of his own stunts, including the chaotic mud wrestling scene which surprised everyone on set. Candy's blend of vulnerability and physical comedy made Ox one of the film's most beloved characters, proving he was more than just comic relief. 6. The mud wrestling scene almost didn't happen. That outrageous scene where Ox wrestles multiple women in a pit of mud, it was nearly axed from the script, not for content, but for logistics. The studio feared it would be too expensive and messy to shoot, but Ivan Reitman pushed for it, believing it would give the film the chaotic energy it needed. It took days to choreograph, required real stunt coordination, and left the actors physically drained. But the result was a scene that became iconic, even if it's a bit dated by today's standards. It's pure 80-second absurdity and pure John Candy. 7. The U.S. Army was not amused at first. When the Department of Defense reviewed the original script, they weren't laughing. In fact, they found it offensive and refused to cooperate. The filmmakers were forced to make script revisions to tone down the military satire and reassure the Pentagon that the Army wouldn't come off looking completely incompetent. Only then did the military allow limited access to facilities like Fort Knox. Even so, many in the Army remained skeptical of how they'd be portrayed until they saw the final film and realized it was more playful than critical. Today, some military veterans even count it among their favorite comedies. 8. The Czechoslovakia scenes were filmed entirely in Kentucky. No one on the Stripes team traveled to Europe. Every scene set in Czechoslovakia, including the dramatic third-act infiltration, was filmed in and around Fort Knox, Kentucky. The production team transformed empty barracks into Eastern Bloc guard posts, added fake snow, and even flew in old Soviet vehicles. The illusion worked surprisingly well, especially given the film's modest budget. It's a testament to old-school movie magic and to the crew's resourcefulness. So next time you see those scenes, remember, you're actually looking at Kentucky in disguise. 9. The EM-50 urban assault vehicle was real. Sort of. The EM-50 wasn't just a prop, it was a heavily modified GMC motorhome built by the production team. Outfitted with hidden weapons, armor plating, radar equipment, and even a fake missile launcher, it could actually drive and perform some of the stunts seen in the film. In fact, the crew took it out on public roads during filming, which led to rumors in nearby towns about a secret military project. It took weeks of custom fabrication to build and cost a big chunk of the film's budget, but it became one of Stripe's most memorable elements. 10. Bill Murray improvised constantly and skipped rehearsals. Reitman and the crew never knew exactly what Murray would do on set. He rarely attended rehearsals, didn't always learn his lines, and frequently improvised. For most directors, this would be a nightmare, but Reitman trusted Murray's instincts. In scenes like Winger's rousing speech to the platoon, almost everything was made up on the spot. It gave the film its spontaneous, unpredictable energy. Ramis once joked that shooting with Murray was like chasing a butterfly with a net, frustrating, but magical when it worked. 11. The film's success saved Ivan Reitman's career. Ivan Reitman had already scored a hit with Meatballs, but Stripes was a much riskier bet. The tone was sharper, the budget bigger, and the cast more unpredictable. If it flopped, it could have set his directing career back years. Instead, it became a breakout hit, grossing over $85 million globally on just a $10 million budget. It also proved that irreverent comedies could still have wide appeal during a time when studios were banking on action and drama. The success of Stripes gave Reitman the industry clout he needed to push through his dream project, Ghostbusters. Without Stripes, that movie may never have gotten off the ground. 12. The line, "That's the fact, Jack," wasn't scripted. One of the most iconic catchphrases from Stripes came from a moment of pure spontaneity. During the marching chant scene, one of the extras shouted, "That's the fact, Jack," completely unplanned. The line got such a big laugh from the cast and crew that it was kept in the film. It ended up on posters, television spots, and even t-shirts. Bill Murray later said it was the kind of line you couldn't write, it had to come out naturally. It became part of the movie's legacy and is still quoted by fans today, decades later. 13. They filmed at a real Army base and left a mark. Most of the boot camp scenes were filmed at Fort Knox, Kentucky, a functioning U.S. Army base. The production was given access to real barracks, mess halls, obstacle courses, and even tanks. But shooting on an active military base came with challenges. One scene accidentally damaged property when a tank drove over part of a parade ground not meant for heavy vehicles. The Army wasn't thrilled. Fortunately, Reitman smoothed things over with a donation and a promise to be more careful. Still, the access gave the movie an authenticity that few comedies of the time could match. 14. Many of the extras were actual Army trainees. Those long training shots with rows of recruits doing push-ups, standing in formation, or jogging, not professional actors. The crew brought in real Army trainees stationed nearby as extras to fill out the scenes. Not only did it save money, but it gave the film a level of realism that Hollywood extras couldn't quite match. Some of the trainees were thrilled to be in a movie, others were just doing what their superiors told them. But if you look closely, you'll notice a few smiling faces where there probably shouldn't be. Real soldiers, real sweat, real boot camp vibes. 15. The cast bonded through basketball and pranks. Shooting on location can be intense, and the cast needed ways to unwind. So they played basketball. A lot. Bill Murray was fiercely competitive and reportedly played in boots to stay in character. Harold Ramis, not exactly an athlete, preferred prank wars, once filling Murray's trailer with shaving cream. John Candy mostly stayed out of the chaos, but even he joined in for games occasionally. These off-screen moments built camaraderie that showed up in the film. It wasn't just acting, the actors were genuinely becoming friends and rivals as the shoot went on. 16. The original cut was almost an hour longer. The first rough cut of Stripes ran nearly 2.5 hours, with entire scenes and subplots that were ultimately trimmed or removed. For example, there was a romance subplot for Ox, and more time spent on training montages and base antics. Studio executives pushed for a tighter, faster pace, and Reitman agreed. While the final version is leaner and more focused, some fans have long wondered what was lost. A few deleted scenes have popped up on DVD releases, but much of the footage remains unseen. A full director's cut has never been released. 17. A sequel was considered multiple times but never happened. The success of Stripes had the studio thinking franchise almost immediately. Throughout the late 82nd and early 2002nd, sequel scripts were floated, some featuring the original cast, returning as instructors at a military academy. Bill Murray and Harold Ramis were open to the idea at different times, but disagreements over tone and story kept it from materializing. After Ramis's passing in 2014, any hope of a reunion faded. Today, Stripes stands as a rare comedy that never got diluted by sequels, and maybe that's for the best. 18. The movie unintentionally boosted Army recruitment. Despite its satirical tone, Stripes ended up helping Army recruitment, at least for a time. The movie made military life seem wild, unpredictable, and even fun, especially for aimless young men. Recruiters reported an uptick in interest after the film's release, with some enlistees even citing the movie as inspiration. Of course, real boot camp was nothing like the film, but the perception stuck. In the mid-82nd, the Army leaned into that interest with ads that had a slightly more relatable tone, trying to appeal to the same audience who laughed at Stripes. 19. Murray and Ramis had real creative tensions. Although their on-screen chemistry was golden, things behind the camera weren't always so smooth. Murray's improvisational chaos clashed with Ramis's more structured approach to comedy. There were days when Ramis grew frustrated at the lack of discipline on set. Though they remained friends after Stripes, their relationship began to fray. It eventually came to a head during Groundhog Day, when creative disagreements led to a falling out that lasted years. Thankfully, the two reconciled shortly before Ramis's death, but Stripes was one of the first signs that their creative partnership had its limits. 20. It paved the way for Ghostbusters. When you watch Stripes, it feels like a rehearsal for Ghostbusters. You've got Reitman directing, Murray and Ramis bouncing off each other, offbeat humor mixed with genre elements, and an anti-establishment streak that defines both films. The success of Stripes proved the team could handle a big studio comedy, and it gave Columbia Pictures the confidence to greenlight Ghostbusters. It's not an exaggeration to say that without Stripes, the 82nd comedy landscape and movie history in general would have looked very different. And that's our roll call, 20 behind-the-scenes facts that prove Stripes was much more than just a goofy military comedy. It came together through chaos, improvisation, and a cast that didn't always play by the rules, but somehow it worked, and the result became one of the defining comedies of the 1982nd. The film's rebellious spirit, misfits trying to get by on charm, and luck mirrored the way it was made. Ramis was a first-time actor. Murray improvised endlessly. The military was skeptical. The studio was unsure. Yet it all clicked, and Stripes became the movie that helped launch Ghostbusters and a whole era of comedy that followed. Over 40 years later, it still delivers. Sure, some jokes are dated, But that energy, messy, loud, unpredictable, still hits. Whether you're watching for nostalgia or discovering it fresh, Stripes is proof that sometimes the funniest stories come from going completely off script. Thanks for marching along with us here at Fade to Fact. If you learned something new, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and drop your favorite Stripes quote in the comments. And remember, that's the fact, Jack.